July 6, 1944, Hartford, Connecticut. A little after 2 in the afternoon, on a vacant lot at the corner of Barber Street, the band inside a circus tent strikes up the music for the big cats. Under the canvas, somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 people sit on wooden bleachers and folding chairs. Most of them are women and children. School is out, the war is on, and the fathers are mostly away. A matinee ticket is a small, ordinary thing to do on a hot summer day. Understand what the circus meant in 1944. There was no television in the home. Gas was rationed, tires were rationed, and a family did not take long trips for fun. The circus came to the family instead. It arrived on its own train, unloaded before dawn, and by afternoon it had built a canvas city on an empty lot. For one day, a working neighborhood in a factory town got the greatest show on earth at its doorstep, and the people who could not travel to anything came to it. That is who filled the tent on Barber Street. Not tourists, neighbors, the women whose husbands were overseas, and the children those women were raising alone, and the grandparents minding them for the afternoon. The tent is the largest the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus owns. It covers nearly 2 acres. It is held up by 6 center poles and a forest of smaller ones, and it is made of canvas that has been waterproofed with a mixture of paraffin wax and gasoline. That last detail is not a secret. It is standard. Canvas gets wet, canvas rots, and a circus that travels by rail through every kind of weather needs its big top to shed rain. So the crews paint it, panel by panel, with wax thinned by gasoline so it soaks in and dries. When it dries, the fabric repels water. It also becomes something else, and the something else is the reason this afternoon will be remembered. Hold that word for now. Waterproofed. We will come back to it, because the way the tent was treated is the whole story, and almost no one under it that day knew. The show is running behind. It ran behind the day before, too. There is an old belief among circus people that a missed show brings bad luck, and the Hartford stand had already missed one. The trains arrived late on the 5th, the tents went up late, and the opening matinee was canceled. That is the kind of small thing that gets remembered afterward, turned over, made to mean more than it did. On the 6th, the circus is determined to make its dates. The tent is packed. The flying Walendas are climbing to their platforms for the high wire act. The big cats have just finished and are being moved out of the arena. To move them, the circus uses steel chutes, long narrow cages of metal bars that run from the animal enclosure, along the ground, and out through the side wall of the tent. The cats travel through these chutes so they never touch the crowd. The chutes cross 2 of the exits. Remember that. 2 of the ways out are blocked by steel cages full of lions. At about 20 minutes past 2, a man in the audience sees a small flame on the side wall of the tent, low, near the main entrance, on the southwest side. It is not large. Several people see it at nearly the same moment. It is the size of a fire you could put out with a bucket if a bucket were near, and if the wall it was climbing were ordinary cloth. It is not ordinary cloth. The flame reaches the paraffin, and the paraffin does what paraffin does. It melts, it feeds the fire, and the fire climbs. Witnesses later described it going up the sidewall and then running along the roof of the tent, over their heads, faster than a person could stand up. The gasoline had long since evaporated out of the canvas. That was never the danger anyone imagined. The danger was the wax, and the wax was everywhere, spread across 2 acres of fabric strung 60 feet in the air. The band leader saw the fire. He turned the band to the one song every circus musician in America knew as the signal of disaster, the tune called "Stars and Stripes Forever." Circus workers heard it and understood at once. The song told the roustabouts and the performers that something had gone badly wrong. It could not tell the audience anything, because the audience did not know the code. To the families on the bleachers, it was just more music, and then it was music with smoke above it, and then the roof was burning. Here is the first reveal, and it is a small, cruel one. The thing that was supposed to protect the tent was the thing that killed it. Waterproofing was a safety measure against rot and rain. On July 6th, it turned 2 acres of canvas into a wick. The fire did not spread. It fell. Burning wax dripped from the roof onto the people below. The tent was gone in less than 10 minutes. Not damaged, gone. The canvas burned off its ropes and the poles stood bare. And where the largest tent in America had been, there was open sky and a rectangle of scorched ground and the wreckage of the seats. 10 minutes is not long. Read a page, boil an egg, wait for a light to change. The big top of the greatest show on earth burned to nothing in less time than that, over the heads of a crowd that had come to watch men balance on a wire. We need to slow down here, because what happened under the canvas in those minutes is the part that has to be handled with care. Thousands of people stood at once and moved toward the edges. The main exits were choked. 2 were blocked by the animal chutes. The steel runs that had carried the cats out, now standing in the path of the crowd like fences. People climbed over them. People were stopped by them. Some found the sidewalls and pushed under the canvas or cut through it and came out into the daylight on the far side, blinking, unhurt. Others did not find a way. The bleachers were high and steep, and the drop behind them was hard. I am not going to describe more than that. The facts of who died and how are documented in detail. No one needs read aloud. What matters for the story is the arithmetic and the objects, the exits, the chutes, the 10 minutes, the wax. Those are the things that decided it, and those are the things the law would later change. There was also, in those minutes, the opposite of the horror, and it belongs in the record too. Performers who had been in the ring turned back toward the crowd. Circus hands and clowns carried children out through the sidewalls. Ordinary people in the audience lifted other people's children over the animal chutes and passed them out to hands on the far side. Some men held the steel bars down or bent them so people could climb across. A great many of the 6,000 or 7,000 under that tent walked out of it in those minutes, into the summer light, and lived. The tent was a trap, and it was also, for most of the people in it, a place they got out of. Both of those are true. The number who died is large because the crowd was enormous, not because escape was impossible for everyone. It was possible for thousands. It simply was not possible for all. When the 10 minutes were over, the city moved. Hartford was a manufacturing town in wartime, and it had hospitals braced for casualties from a war that had not yet touched it at home. Now the casualties came from a circus lot. Doctors and nurses worked through the afternoon and the night. Neighbors near Barber Street brought water and sheets and carried the injured into their own houses. Soldiers from a nearby base helped clear the ground. The response was fast and it was decent, and it saved lives that the fire had not already taken. None of it could undo the 10 minutes. Nothing could. But it is worth saying that when the tent came down, the people around it did not stand still. About 167 people died. Hundreds more were injured. The exact number of the dead has never been perfectly fixed, because a crowd that size, on a walk-up summer afternoon in wartime, was never fully counted going in. That uncertainty is itself part of what went wrong. No one knew how many people were under the tent, because no one was required to know. A temporary structure could hold as many bodies as could be squeezed onto its benches, and the only limit was how many tickets the sellers cared to sell. Most of the dead were women and children. The men were at the war or at work, and the matinee crowd was the crowd that a Thursday afternoon in July produces. That is the shape of this particular tragedy, and it is why it landed on Hartford the way it did. It was not a fire in a factory full of workers. It was a fire in a room full of mothers and their kids. Now the second loop opens, and it is a quiet one. In the hours after the fire, the injured were carried to the city's hospitals, and the dead were carried to a makeshift morgue set up in a building nearby. Families came to find the people who had not come home. Most of the dead were identified quickly, by relatives, by clothing, by the small things people carry. Within a few days, nearly all of them had names again. Nearly all. We will come back to the ones who did not. Hold that. The investigation started before the ground was cool. The state of Connecticut and the city of Hartford wanted answers, and the questions were not hard to ask. Why did the tent burn like that? Why were exits blocked? How many people were even inside? The answers came fast, because the answers were not mysterious. The tent burned like that because it had been waterproofed with wax. The exits were blocked because the animal chutes crossed them, and no rule said they could not. The crowd was uncounted because no rule said it had to be counted. Several circus officials were charged. Some served time. The circus itself, the corporation, accepted responsibility for the claims that followed, and this is a point worth stating plainly, because it is unusual. Ringling did not fight the families through years of court. It set up a way to pay them. Over the following years, the company paid out millions of dollars in claims to the injured and to the families of the dead, and it did so under an arrangement that took the money out of its future profits. The greatest show on earth spent years paying for one afternoon in Hartford. That is the third reveal, and it changes the emotional key of the story, from horror to consequence. Because a fire that kills 167 people can end as a fire, a terrible thing that happened, and then was mourned, and then was filed away. Hartford did not end that way. It became law. The laws came at the state level first, and then spread. Flameproofing. After Hartford, the treatment of tent canvas was regulated. Waterproofing with wax and gasoline, the standard that had turned the big top into a wick, was pushed out in favor of fabrics treated to resist flame, tested and certified before a crowd could be let inside. Exits. Temporary structures were required to have enough of them, unobstructed, wide enough, clearly marked, never crossed by an animal chute or anything else. And occupancy. This is the quiet, powerful one. After Hartford, the number of people a temporary structure could legally hold stopped being a matter of how many tickets the seller wanted to print. It became a fixed number, set in advance, tied to the exits, enforceable. You have benefited from that number. Every time you have walked into a hall, a tent, a club, a theater, and seen a small sign near the door that says the maximum number of persons permitted in this room, you were looking at the descendant of Hartford. The idea that a room has a legal limit and that someone counts, and that the count is tied to how fast the room can empty, is not ancient common sense. It was written in blood on a lot on Barber Street in the summer of 1944. The pattern is old and it is grim. Almost every rule that keeps a crowd safe was bought with a crowd that was not. A factory fire teaches a city to unlock its exit doors. A theater fire teaches it to make doors swing outward. A nightclub fire teaches it to ban the decorations that turn a wall into fuel. Hartford taught the country about tents and about counting and about the wax that no one had thought to fear. The lessons were sitting there in plain sight the whole time. It took the fire to make anyone write them down. That is the part of the story that faces forward, toward us, and it is the part that justifies telling it. But there is still the loop we left open, the one about the ones who were not named. And that loop does not close cleanly. It is not supposed to. Return to the morgue in the days after the fire, with nearly every body claimed. Among the small number that no family came for was a young girl. She was estimated to be about 6 years old. She had fair hair, and she was, in the words the investigators used, largely unmarked by the flame. Whatever took her life, it was not the burning that took most. She looked, to the people who saw her, like a child asleep. And no one came for her. They photographed her. The picture was published so that a parent, an aunt, a neighbor might recognize the face and give her a name. No one did. The days passed, and she stayed unclaimed, and she was buried in a cemetery in Hartford with the other unidentified dead of the fire. On her grave, and on the records that followed her, she had no name. She had a number. The number assigned to her body at the morgue. 1565. For decades that was all she was, Little Miss 1565. A girl who died in the most photographed, most investigated public disaster the state had ever seen, in a crowd of thousands, in a city full of people looking for their children, and somehow no one ever proved who she was. A local police officer and a state investigator kept her file open for years. They put flowers on her grave. They did not let her go. But the name did not come. Here I have to be careful, because the story wants an ending, and the facts do not fully give one. In later years, a name was put forward. An investigator argued that the girl was a child named Eleanor Cook, who had come to the circus that day with her family, and who did not come home. Her mother survived. Her brother did not. Based on that work, the remains were eventually moved and reburied under the Cook name. But the identification has never been accepted by everyone who has studied it. Some of the evidence did not fit. Details of age and appearance were argued over. There are people, careful people, who believe the match was wrong, and who think Little Miss 1565 is still, in truth, unnamed. So I will not tell you her name, because I do not know it, and neither, for certain, does anyone. What I can tell you is the shape of the thing. A girl died in a fire that killed 167 people. Almost all of them were carried back into the world of the named, returned to families who buried them and mourned them and remembered them. She was not. For more than half a century she was known by the number a clerk wrote beside her in a temporary morgue. And even now, when a name has been carved for her, the number is what people say when they mean her. That is the strangest and the smallest of the injuries Hartford did. Not only did the fire take her life, it took, for a very long time, the fact of who she was. There is one more figure who has to be mentioned, because he is part of the record, and because leaving him out would be its own kind of lie. Years after the fire, more than a decade later, a man named Robert Seegey, who had worked for the circus as a young roustabout in 1944, confessed to setting it. He said he had started fires as a boy, and he described the Hartford blaze as one of them. For a time, the confession made headlines because a confession is a clean ending and people wanted one. But the confession did not hold. Seegey was in and out of institutions. His accounts changed, and Connecticut authorities, the people who had investigated the fire from the first hour, did not accept that he had done it. He was never tried for the Hartford fire. He was never convicted of it. The official cause of the fire was never proven to be arson at all. It may have been a carelessly dropped cigarette against the sidewall. It may have been something electrical. It may have been a match. The one honest answer is that the source of the first small flame, the one several people saw low on the southwest wall, was never established beyond doubt, and it never will be. So there are two mysteries at the center of Hartford, and neither one closes. We do not know for certain who started the fire. We do not know for certain the name of the girl it left behind. Everything in between, the wax, the 10 minutes, the blocked exits, the uncounted thousands, the 167 dead, the laws that followed, all of that is known, documented, settled. It is only at the two ends, the cause and the child, that the record goes quiet and stays quiet. Now stand back and look at the whole thing the way you can only look at it now, more than 80 years later. A circus came to a city in wartime and put up the largest tent in America, waterproofed the way every big top of its era was waterproofed, and sold as many tickets as it could to a crowd of mothers and children on a summer afternoon. A small fire started on a wall. The wax carried it up and across 2 acres in under 10 minutes. Some exits were blocked by the steel cages that had just carried the lions out. 167 people did not come home, and out of that, slowly, came the plain and permanent idea that a room full of people must have a limit, and doors, and someone who counts. The circus paid. It paid for years, out of its profits, without the long fight the families might have expected, and the greatest show on earth kept traveling, kept performing, kept drawing crowds in other cities in other summers. But it made one quiet decision that it never announced and never explained, and that decision is where this ends. The big top that burned in Hartford was the last of its kind the circus would ever raise. The company moved, over the following years, away from the enormous canvas tent altogether and toward performing in permanent buildings, in arenas with concrete walls and marked exits and fixed seats and a number on the door. The great waterproof tent, the 2 acres of wax and rope and sky that had defined the American circus for generations, was folded up for the last time. They never raised that tent again.